Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Hall, and I'm a moderator for today's Meet a Poet series. I'm a poet myself from Washington, D.C., where I served as the Youth Poet Laureate in 2023. But right now, I'm calling in from Philadelphia, where I currently study creative writing and consumer psychology at UPenn. I'm delighted to introduce today's poet for our Meet a Poet program, Dylan Fritz. Dylan is a graduating senior at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studies English, urban studies, and French. He has a few too many places he calls home, but when not at school, he lives with his family and many pets in Greenville, South Carolina. You can find his work in Arc Poetry Magazine, Marathon Literary Review, Celestite Poetry, and elsewhere. And right now, he's probably eating an orange and thinking about his cat, Jack-o'-lantern. But actually, right now, he's here joining us for the Meet a Poet series. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear you read your poems aloud. And after the session, we'll have a brief Q&A chat. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dylan.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Sophia. And thank you all for having me here today. This is so exciting. I'm going to be reading a few poems today from a kind of ongoing project that I'm working on that explores the relation between two art forms that are really important to me, both poetry and fiber arts. So I do a lot with crochet, knitting, weaving, and I found that these forms are very similar to each other. I am kind of this ongoing project is working to kind of merge them into one form, focusing on the kind of interwoven qualities of both, thinking about like text and textile as these two very related things that kind of have even the same etymological origin. And so kind of paying attention to both of these and is kind of at the heart of this project. So I'm reading a few poems from this, and yeah, I'll get started. This first one is called Pattern By. There are a few of these poems in here called Pattern By, and I'll explain why that is maybe a little bit later. This is one of the first poems I wrote from this collection, written in a poetry course that I was taking actually during this semester that I was starting to kind of knit a lot, and it kind of slowly started to make its way into my poetry as well. And so both of these things kind of found their way together for me. All right, so Pattern By. Today I spent 20 minutes picking my hair from the blanket I made this summer, each piece tangled. Someday I'd love to knit a blanket from my hair and unravel it. This summer, I took the bus every morning and wanted to read, except most of the time I'd end up staring out the window. Just in time to see my stop pass by, I pull the cord too late. I get to work an hour early because more than anything, I'm scared of my legs and the bus schedule. At night, I burrito myself in an unfinished blanket, a green called kale with white stripes called oatmeal. I think of them like racing stripes. The tighter I wrap, the faster I go. I miss nothing from this space. I see the sun sink, creeping through the blinds. I can't wave goodbye. I can't wave goodbye. 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 Awesome. So that is the first of these kind of Pattern By poems that I wrote, kind of exploring this like big project that I kind of worked on, this blanket that I had made one summer. This next one is called To the Yarn Bomb on South Street. It is written after one of my favorite poets. His name is Ross Gay, and he is a Philadelphia poet. So he writes a lot of his poetry with this kind of attention to space and kind of this attention to community. as well that I find really important. And as I'm like finishing up college, this has been a big thing for me as I'm like looking to embark on this kind of new chapter of my life. I guess I'm reflecting a lot on this kind of concept of not only the community that I've had at school with me, but also this community in Philadelphia at large. It's a very community centric city. And I've actually been working in a school this semester. And so that's kind of worked its way into this poem as well. This kind of idea of stepping into this place that I'm not necessarily from, but making connections within it and finding those through this kind of journey, I guess, that I've been on in college. And so that kind of makes it, all of that kind of makes its way into this poem. So to the yarn bomb on South Street after Rosquet. On a day it snows, I watch each puddle like it would betray me, reach and chain my ankle, punish me for jaywalking or blasting music too loud through my new earbuds because I keep losing half of old pairs to AC units or air, and my knitting playlist doesn't hit the same on my phone speaker. I can hear the rain making the yarn bomb sag as I creep by, colors bleed through my ears like they're about to detonate. Static through my fingertips, cables all too capable, smacking pavement and wondering how to explode. And now I've said it too plainly. Like, why don't we read Dickinson in my geology class during our unit on volcanoes? And magma, that stuff pushing through you, splitting you in two, that crystallizing business. And who knew the faster it happened, the smaller the crystals form. Like if I took my hook and stitched a puddle, the droplets would coalesce and into one long chain, as long as I could make it. Like the kids are making candygrams today, and I tie the notes, bowed black yarn, copying down, I love you, and thank you for holding me down, and I'm sorry, I hope you forgive me, and I want to celebrate you on bubblegum paper, breathing and popping, poking holes in baggies of candy, and hoping they get to the right places. They yell in the hallway, Candygram, sitting on a bed of confetti, ready to be opened, unwrapped, melting in pockets, dripping through fingers and lips, and crystallizing hot magma, someday halting, someday breathing. Some web of yarn, staticized and fenced. I'm wondering the difference between eruption and explosion, and what it would look like to freeze both in time, to let my ankles sink and wipe the mush from my boots and say, I love you, and I'm sorry, and thank you for holding me down. Yeah, so that one, I realized I never explained exactly what it's to. It's my freshman year, especially my first year in college, I passed by this kind of installation called a yarn bomb in South Philly, which is kind of just this web of yarn that's put on a fence somewhere, and it's they can symbolize a lot of things. I think this one was specifically kind of in reference or invoking the sense of like hope in the future, but they're kind of this kind of street art, alternative kind of street art that normally people wouldn't think of, and that concept always really stuck with me. Yeah. So this next one is called Stitch Markers. And I'll briefly explain the process for creating this poem because it was a little bit different. This process originally comes from a poet called Joan Ritalik, who dropped paper clips on a text and took the words that were like in the paper clips and that you could like see through the hole in them, and created a poem from these words. And so that's this kind of random or aleatory process. And it really calls attention to the process of creating a poem, which was really important for me in this collection, as both poetry and crochet are so process based. And so that became really important to me through this collection as well. And so I'll read this one. Stitch markers. The way during life, whose bodies often gaze scholarship of homicide after outcome, as workers gaze to degree. To improve bounds of coexistence, classical tendencies prevailed in modernity. Shanghai known population, commitment. Decision had made was adhere to it. The heightening where observation between false translator's child dead. I and never her. She of possibilities. She in social entanglements. The first immunities dry beyond realizing. Look, encounter processes on the production site. Collide not through she. Mom approached comparisons intensely of child. Reminded friends Italian works in required heading. Pre-capitalists oftentimes encounter flexibility. Green, handsome women, the dress with its space. He drove by on street of benches, his as in casual appeal, and the privilege involved about increasing city reconstruction. And that they were not as poor to Praeteria than political-faced bananas. Just a comment. Posting any couscous activities, and one shoulder toward smoke, prominent procession. The scale redirecting artery. Behind them who shop trance-like. They watch jewelry struggles become utopian conceptions desperately. In that we were trying to follow the spread, distraught, around dumplings, to know, to describe the woolly phenomenon about another, worn in the development of them as miracle. Yeah. So this next one is called A List of Incomplete Projects, and that's kind of referring to um, all of these like different projects I have that haven't been completed. And I wrote a few of these poems that are kind of lists of objects, drawing on different things around me, thinking of each list item kind of like its own stitch, kind of building upon itself until it's reached a completed product. So that was kind of an important concept for me in writing these. So a list of incomplete projects. 1. Granny square overalls of thrifted yarn, chalkboard colors I plot against my torso, pinning leg to leg and stomach to stomach. The straps stretch each time I try it on, holes dripping. My mom tells me the shape is off. The back panel isn't quite right. It sags, leaves a gap in between my spine and 2. A gray beanie of grandma's yarn sent in a box from Texas. Opened on the floor of my friend's bedroom. Yarn cascades, pools, strangles. Later, I imagine a mouse getting lost in this box, burrowing, eating. I lace it with peppermint, check it weekly, dig my fingers in, searching for 3. Granny square cardigan of bursting yellow daisies. Even unwatered, they tower on my dresser. The joining is the hard part. YouTube tells me how to weave in loose ends. I hope the best way is to leave them alone, as if they'd writhe like snakes into their burrows, all returning to 4. Charcoal hat. The first I tried to crochet, not knowing the amount of yarn I'd need. It dwindled a quarter way through, burning wick, waxed strand. I imagine it stains my hands soot, that if I went faster, it would stretch just far enough, but really it was just telling me to slow down and 5. Amber scarf, metallic needles, chopstick thick. Knit while watching Thelma and Louise with my college roommate. Yarn as winding road, as heartstring, as bullet, traversing our couch, crystallizing. The yarn is still there, I'm sure, dangling from the side of the couch, waiting to jump, waiting to. All right. This next one I'm going to read is called Procedure on the Chemistries of Weaving. It's another one based on a work of Joan Retallack's called Essence is an Attribute. Actually, I have the book right here. Her book, Procedural Elegies, Western Civ Continued. It's it's a very weird book. It is very, very difficult to read. It kind of has that attention to like this uncertainty, this work that you're putting into interpreting a text. And I get a lot of like procedural inspiration from her as well. And it ends with this kind of attention to this idea of carrying on the poem. And this was kind of a concept that was really important to me. Was this idea of this project that could kind of extend infinitely. Like there's no real end to this like poetry that I'm writing. I can always continue to come back to it, to change it, to add on to it. And so this idea of it being something that can be continued on forever felt very, very central. And so I'll read this one now. Procedure on the Chemistries of Weaving, after Joan Retallack. A. All I can remember is getting the call you died. And that wasn't right. I didn't get the call. Dad did. He did, and he told me while I was eating Life cereal at the breakfast table. And the milk faded from the side, so I went to school, didn't cry in chemistry, didn't cry, went to your funeral, didn't cry, went to sleep. We're planning a 90th birthday party, and you should probably be here. It's taken me long enough to say this, to say everything. I think of you when cereal milk. I think of you when I remember when I. B. The key is to remember that M2 means M times M. Remember, we don't use the mono prefix. Remember the rule that the unknown quantity must be by itself. Remember, never taste anything. You must remember to perform this final subtraction to determine the amount remaining. To start, remember that some chemical reactions are rather difficult to perform. Remember that this equation calculates the change. We need to remember to include the Van Hoff factor. Remember, the variable you are solving for must be in the numerator and all by itself. Remember that the power affects everything inside the parentheses. There are some useful ways to remember the order. Remember that what is initially calculated is the change. I forgot to mention this, but this B text was taken specifically from a chemistry textbook. C. 1A. All I can remember is getting the call you died. The key is to remember that M2 means M times M. And that wasn't right. I didn't get the call. Remember, we don't use the mono prefix. Dad did. He did, and he told me while I was eating. Remember, the rule that the unknown quantity must be by itself. Life cereal at the breakfast table. Remember, we never taste anything. And the milk faded from the side, so I went to school. You must remember to perform this final subtraction to determine the amount remaining. Didn't cry, sat in chemistry. To start, remember that some chemical reactions are rather difficult to perform. Didn't cry, went to your funeral. Remember that this equation calculates the change. Didn't cry, went to sleep. We need to remember to include the Van Hoff factor. We're planning a 90th birthday party, and you should probably be here. Remember, the variable you are solving for must be in the numerator and all by itself. It's taken me long enough to say this, to say everything. Remember that the power affects everything inside the parentheses. I think of you when cereal milk. There are some useful ways to remember the order. I think of you when I remember that what is initially calculated is the change. To carry on, set A, B, C, Z, 1 to 12 in any recombinations that include all elements of A and B. Okay. This next one is called A List of Stitches I Never Said Aloud. This one was all, or certain pieces of language were taken from this book that I have called the New Crochet Stitch Dictionary. And so it's all these stitches that I thought looked interesting, hadn't heard of before, thought I might want to try at some point, and kind of exploring that through poetry. A list of stitches I never said aloud. Snapdragon stitch, beheaded, arms and legs outstretched and dangling from stacked shells, sandy wall, imprinted with trapped cockles, intertwined, ornamental bands, plaited like DNA strands, a sort of life-giving, restrained in double diamond mesh, pale blue net. I imagine catching something, a fish, an ending, owl, beaded face, eyes poking through mulberry foliage, talons poised, stitches reaching across my stomach, hatching together a life, holding acorn cluster stitch, like a tree I used to climb, gathering them in my palms, caps like dragon spikes, soft and shielded, poking through stitched scales, a skin of large star pattern, dozens of constellations holding hands, woven nebulae measured in stitches above my right eye, a moment of blindness, a reminder of distraction by floral pattern bands, garden of embedded bulbs, blooming geraniums nestled within, interwoven stitch, a poem, a friendship, the world as degrees of separation between you and a wicker basket holding apples on a sunny day, bursting at the seams, a dream, a time you had me in stitches, a time you draped your hand across mine. Yeah. Um So that was, yeah, a list of stitches I've never said aloud. This next one is another pattern by, and I'm realizing I never explained the concepts or how these poems kind of came to be. Specifically, these are based off a series of poems I wrote in high school, or not a series actually, just one poem I wrote in high school with a teacher of mine that I really connected with. I feel like I learned a lot about writing poetry in her class. And she prompted us one day to write a poem based off of a part of a book. And so that could be anything. I imagine title, cover, but I chose byline as mine. And I thought it would be really interesting to kind of work through the construction of like the name of a speaker through a poem, like a poem that's called byline, being the byline. Um, and I wrote this poem that didn't feel connected to the speaker. It felt like it was doing something else, and I was kind of spinning my wheels and just never went anywhere with it. And my teacher was so nice. She was like, "This is not quite working, but this it's going in the right direction." I was like, I don't know if it actually is." So she was trying to be nice. But this when I was kind of working through the start of this collection, I wrote another poem, the one I read a few minutes ago that was called Pattern By, and I wrote it, and it was originally called Byline, and in fitting it within this collection, the name changed to Pattern By, which in my mind is kind of the same thing, but refers more to this idea of like who might create a knitting pattern or a crochet pattern. And then as I was kind of starting this collection, my poetry teacher, who I had mentioned before, published a collection called Everyone I've Danced With Is Dead. And I have it here too, actually. This collection right here. It's a beautiful collection, and she's an incredible poet. And in the collection, there are many poems called Everyone I've Danced With Is Dead. And that idea really stuck with me, this idea of building a longer poem that's almost split up into parts, or multiple poems that are under the same umbrella, that are building upon each other. And so that was where this idea came to do these pattern by poems, have them kind of building upon each other, and kind of this idea of the creation of oneself, this almost like coming of age Bildungsroman kind of form, and using this as an opportunity to do that through exploring these different projects that I've worked on over the past few years. Okay, pattern by. In my apartment, where my landlord controls my heat, it's too hot for my oatmeal and kale blanket. I keep my window open for the breeze to waft in, so I have an excuse to bundle up. It's as energy unconscious as I get, anything to feel warm of my own doing. The heat fills the space in a way I wish I could. I stretch posters across every corner of wall I can find, settling into crevices. When I move out, I want it to be a challenge to find everywhere I've stuffed a sheet of scrap paper, a postcard, all the snipped pieces of yarn lost behind the dresser. In 5 years, I want someone to enter this oven and find me here. All the strings of me, the pencil lead, my voice from an open window, even where one isn't. Okay, this next one is called Heart Machine. And I realize I've been talking quite a lot, so I think I'm just going to read this one. Close my eyes in Philly, teaching A and J to crochet hearts, tiny ones, stumbling each stitch. I don't know how to move their fingers for them. Wire them up to mine, marionette style. Show them how to triple and double and pull a magic ring out of their fingers. And some sleepless nights, puppeting myself, dream weaving every argument I've ever lost into a crochet heart, into a thread wrapped around two stress-peeled fingers, thrifting a craft machine to pump blood through my eyes and forearms, twined veins, dyed red, pumping, needling my bones, becoming bionic and ancient, crafted and conscious, each wrinkle on my hand the crease of fabric, my cracked knuckles, the clasps of stitch markers, and the nicked scar on my left index finger, product of fixing a broken mug from a train ride through Alaska, fixing a memory, piercing it back together again, whipping pine trees, scratching windows, steamed entrance, catching a glimpse of a lake in the heart of a valley. And if I could only stitch my brain and that part that sees. But it's easier sometimes to go straight to the source and weave yourself into what you're creating. Something worth puppeting, something worth being. Yeah. So I kind of realized as I was writing these just how much like looking at these different things that I was making and kind of how that allowed me to kind of unlock different memories that I didn't even know that I really wanted to write about. There's a quote from this writer Lynn Haginian who recently passed away. She says, "Writing is an aid to memory." In a lot of ways, I felt in writing these poems that writing writing was an aid to memory, but also this process of knitting and crochet and making something for someone else because it reminds you of them and what exactly that memory is was really kind of interesting for me in writing these. This last one is called I Am Moving Too Fast, So. I'm marking time in hats I've crocheted, oranges I've peeled, the amount of times I've squeezed my pillow, melatonin I've taken, times my bed's creaked, mice I've seen, shirts I've put on backwards, times you've forgotten your water bottle on my desk, knots in my shoelaces, pictures taped to the wall, hats I've made for you, oranges I've peeled for you, books stacked on my AC, times I've tried to hide a yawn, times I've almost tripped in the same sidewalk hole, times I've forgotten a song I once could play on the guitar, plastic water bottles unopened on my nightstand, times I've run my fingers through your hair, inches of rainfall, meters of snowfall, threads my rug has shed, times I've called my dad, how long I've needed a haircut, the number of cats I've seen, socks you've worn unpaired, paper straws I've been handed, times my wet hair has dried on my pillow, times you've laid your head on my pillow, times our backs have pressed together as we fall asleep slowly, listening to my fan click like the hands of a clock, our hands. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you. There, Sophia.
Hi. I just I'm so blown away by your poetry and this project. I think not to intentionally pun, but like you really weave together the theme of textiles in your memories and your words. So it's really, really impressive. Um, I was
I
wondering,
appreciate it. Thank you.
yeah, I was just wondering, could you talk about when you first started writing poetry? Was there a particular moment or experience that set you on this path?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I I always loved to read. That was like such a central part of my childhood. I read voraciously. And but I didn't realize like um or I guess like I didn't fully conceptualize that I also just loved creating stories. That was like also um kind of a big thing for me in a way I didn't realize. Me and my brother used to like create little zines that we would like write about like our cats or something like that. And then I in fourth grade, I we had like a project to write poetry, which was kind of the first time I was really being exposed to poetry, other than like Shel Silverstein or something like that. And uh, and definitely my first time being exposed to like writing poetry, thinking about like, oh, this is something that I can like do. Like this is not something that's inaccessible to me. And so I got really into writing haikus. That was like my first kind of thing. And just like small little poems. And it was always like stuff in my life, like things I was seeing, like observational, very observationally based. Um, and yeah, it kind of caught on from there. It became kind of my way of processing the world around me in a lot of ways. The world is so interconnected in like the weirdest ways, and I just feel like poetry, like for me, has been a way of exploring those interconnections in a way that makes sense to me. Uh, I'm not always a very like logical person. I kind of like I mean, sometimes I am, but like sometimes I just need to like I see this connection and it like doesn't quite make sense. But to me, it makes sense, and expressing that through poetry feels like the most natural way to do so. So that was very much like for me, this kind of like latching on point, I guess.
How do you think your self-expression differs through poetry versus through knitting or crocheting?
Mm. Oh, that's a really good question. For poetry, well, actually, I'll start with knitting. Um, when I most of the things I knit or crochet are for other people. And so when I'm doing that, it's like the perfect gift. It's so easy. I like just have to. I don't have to like think that hard. I just am making something, and that is always really nice because I'm kind of a terrible gift giver. Um, and so for that, it's like, and I'm also like usually following some sort of pattern, or there are certain like stitches at the very least that are kind of um I know them, and so I can use them again to create something. For poetry, it's different because it is I'm not necessarily writing poems for other people. I and my mom always sometimes talks about this too. She's not a big like she doesn't love like receiving gifts, or she's not a very like materialistic person. So for like Mother's Day or her birthday, she's always been like, "Oh, just like write me a poem or something." And I'm like, it's not that easy necessarily to like I don't know, that's just not how I conceptualize writing poetry. Um and so it's more for myself, I would say. And it's interesting because I really do think that they rely on such similar structural frameworks. The process for creating both of them doesn't feel expressly all that different to me. And I mean, in some ways it does, but in a lot of ways it is this like interweaving attention to aesthetics, rhythmic. It's all of those things. Um, but I'm doing different things with both of them. They're going different places.
You mentioned that for knitting, like there's usually a certain stitch that you would use for your project, and they're like patterns for completing different kinds of clothing. And I think form poetry, which a lot of your poems that you read today,
Mm,
is kind of like you were given a pattern by previous poets or by a container that you're really interested by. For example, your Joan Ritalik inspired poem, where you have the procedure on the chemistries of weaving, and it's literally weaving
mm,
together the different lines. So I think the connections that you're drawing between poetry and knitting is really, really cool. Um, I think I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about our creative writing experience at Penn. So, fun fact,
mhm,
Dylan was the first person I met at Penn. There's this place called the Kelly Writers House on campus. And when I was a junior in high school, Dylan was my tour guide, and he took me around the house and showed me all the different classrooms where I could take creative writing classes or join creative writing clubs. And he even showed me the little foyer, or the vestibule, we call it, where there are tons of literary magazines, some of which I'm a part of today, and Dylan is also a part of. Um, Specifically, I wanted to talk about this one class that we took at different times. It's called Modern and Contemporary US Poetry, or ModPo for short. I could just see a lot of ModPo inspiration in the poems that you read today, especially in your reference to Emily Dickinson in To the Yarn Bomb on South Street. You talked about how we should study Dickinson in your geology class, and her poem that we study in ModPo called Volcanoes Be in Sicily literally talk about her feminist writing in isolation and how she kind of equates that to a volcano in her writer's room literally exploding. And that just connects to the yarn bomb and kind of this reclamation of public space with this more traditionally feminine art. So I was just wondering if you I put a lot of threads out there for you to grab onto. So just feel free to talk about ModPo or about that poem or about the Kelly Writers House, leaving it open.
gosh, yeah. I feel like I should have been taking notes while you were talking. I'll start with the Writer's House. It has been such an important space for me. I discovered the Writer's House in my junior year of high school, uh, and like that's like really a time when like you're thinking about the future, all this uncertainty. That was also when uh, the pandemic was really starting, and so there was just a lot of uncertainty in like the world, and I really kind of latched on to this idea of like there being a house somewhere out there. I'm from South Carolina, which is like a 10-hour drive from Philadelphia. So it's like a pretty significant distance away, and just this idea of a house somewhere out there in this city that I don't really know anything about. But it is dedicated to writing, and I heard and to like the community surrounding writing too. Is was really important to me. I applied to Penn. I was very lucky to be admitted, and making my decision to go there was really based on the fact. I mean, a lot of things, but like um, just the fact that I could like explore writing in this space with other people was really important. I heard about ModPo my senior year of high school, and really big plug for both the Writers House and ModPo. I guess for the Writers House first, all of our events are live streamed, and so that's like a really um, we reach out across the world really with the people that are engaging, and ModPo as well has a this in person component where students like Sophia and I are sitting in class and talking about poetry and having these like close reading discussions, like literally like word by word unpacking these poems. Uh, but there's also this whole online component and community built of tens of thousands of people that are engaging with these poems, uh, watching discussion videos, talking in different on different chat boards. It's really interesting, and so that was like the fact that all of these things kind of existed and can reach so far. I thought was really fascinating. Um, and yeah, having that community was really important and has been really important. Engaging with poetry in that way was also very important. This kind of collaborative, close reading process really just opens so many more doors up than if you're just like reading a poem by yourself, which there is so much merit to that as well. But for me, this discussion based kind of group of poets was really, really interesting. And then yeah, it definitely made its way into the volcano poem. I can't really think of volcanoes without thinking of Emily Dickinson, and that was kind of where that came from too. And especially like a lot of this project, there are a few poems that I didn't read that are specifically dedicated to like my mom and my grandma's. And you mentioned weaving as this kind of traditionally feminine art, and there is a lot there, and a lot that I'm kind of not fully immersing myself in, but knowing that I'm participating in this like tradition and heritage of women artists who haven't necessarily been given credit for the work that they've done, or historically this work has been treated as lesser or not as like artistic or beautiful, or as worthy of attention. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but just like not a knowledge for that as well. And then thinking about like, of course, how could I not mention Emily Dickinson as well, and her kind of the heritage that I'm participating in on that lens too. And this like box of yarn that my grandma sent me, like that is another kind of heritage I'm taking from kind of all of these things. And so I don't know, paying attention to that was really important to me.
Definitely. And in that poem specifically, I just really loved the journey you went on when you were originally really scared of the slushy snow puddles at the beginning, but then your crochet hook or your knitting needle helped you gain agency. You were able to like with your words imagine crocheting together the puddle into a string of droplets, and I thought that that was really really effective and cool. In the Kelly Writers House, besides just ModPo and like our live stream events, you're you are a leader in a lot of student organizations, such as the Penn Review, our literary magazine, and the Body Electric, a weekly poetry workshop. And you also have been running your own literary magazine, the Fishbarrel Review, since you were in high school, right? That's awesome. Tell us more about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. So in high school, I started like submitting my own work to different magazines, and it felt like a one to two, or like a very specific type of relationship. Like I am the submitter, and the people I am submitting to are the very knowledgeable people that know if my work is worthy of getting published. And that's how my like very new kind of black and white kind of mindset was about it. And then we had a visitor to our class named Peter LaBerge, who is um, he's like such a big guy in the poetry scene in the U.S. He founded a literary journal when he was in, I think his freshman year of high school, called the Adroit Journal, which has just like blown up into this like amazing thing. And he was like, "Yeah, I like wanted to do this, and so I did, and now it's really really cool." And so I, with a friend of mine, founded Fishbarrel soon after talking with him, and then we had another conversation with him later, and he had a lot of great advice. Um, and just this, like, I love, and this kind of connects to some of the stuff I do in, or very much connects to some of the stuff I do in college. I love reading other people's writing. And beyond that, I love workshopping people's writing. I love figuring out how it can better connect with an audience. I love figuring out how it can better express what the speaker wants to say. And that just like is really makes my brain happy. And so I was really attracted to this idea of editorial work, and we also do something where we provide feedback. Fishbarrel does to submissions, so for a small fee, I like sit down and kind of figure out with an author how, from my perspective, how their poem can better reach their audience, and so uh, that is something that's been really fun for me to do. And so I love reading other people's work. And so when I got to college, I joined the Penn Review as well. Um, and then I also joined the Body Electric, which is a poetry workshop that meets at the Writer's House as well. And that has been a really wonderful space as well. That's like an actual, like, proper workshop group, where we sit down, we chat, we have a bunch of snacks, and someone brings in a poem once a week, and we workshop it. And so we figure out what we like about it, what we want to see more of, what we think it could be doing better. And that's of course all subjective, but that's part of the fun of it, is that everyone, like, there are times when people have different opinions, and we figure out why that kind of is. And so that's been such a wonderful community as well. I don't know, all of these things have really made me realize how much I appreciate. I feel like I keep saying community, 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 but I've just met so many amazing people through these kind of outlets, and I feel like I have learned so much about my own writing as well. I feel like the best, honestly, like, in thinking about like submitting to magazines, like, kind of, and like how I can better my work, is I've gotten so much out of like reading the work of other people who are also submitting to magazines, and being like, oh, like, this is what I like, or I don't like it when people do this, or um, it has helped kind of demystify the process in a lot of ways, and so that's been really impactful as well.
Speaking about demystifying the process, do you have any advice for people who want to start writing poetry, reading poetry, or any advice about the revision process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, my first piece of advice is just to read a lot, and that's kind of what I was just saying, is um, the more you read, you don't have to be reading like for a literary magazine, but just reading the work of poets that you like, and figuring out why you like um, the things that you do, um, can be like the best way uh, to figure out what about your own writing isn't working, and what about your own writing you want to revise, and just to like better express yourself at the end of the day. uh, and so that, I feel like, is my biggest piece of advice, is that reading is really, really important. I also think reading your own writing out loud can be really helpful, and just hearing it aloud, hearing where the natural pauses are, hearing what maybe you said a different word, and like maybe that's the word that should be there instead. Um, and it'll happen differently maybe every time, but that'll help you kind of learn about the poems that you are writing. Uh, and I think those are maybe my biggest pieces of advice. And also, like, not being afraid to be like specific and vulnerable, I think, can be also really important. A lot of people kind of shy away from really opening up within their poetry, but that can be the most important thing sometimes. And that specificity, like, it's kind of counterintuitive, because you think like to relate to a lot of people, maybe you have to be very general, but people really relate to like the very specific minutia of daily life. And that's like, for me, I always connect with that most in a poem, when someone has a line that I'm just like, oh, like, I also do that. And that's like, I never would have thought that that's something that I would have connected with, but here I am. And just really paying attention to the small details and kind of building from there can be really important.
Yeah, I totally agree about the specificity. I think in your last pattern by poem, you had a line that said, "When I move out, I want it to be a challenge." And as someone who has to move out of my college dorm in the next 2 weeks, it's definitely going to be a challenge for me, but the place that I've called home for the past 2 semesters has truly become my space, and it's really special. And you've created such a special space in your poems. They kind of house all of your memories and your unfinished projects and all your hopes and aspirations. And Dylan, I don't know, you mentioned that this was like a project that you were working on, but I just want to highlight the fact that it's your creative writing honors thesis because this is a thesis project that you completed, which is a huge deal, and you will be reading it at the Writers' House on Wednesday. So, big applause for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really really cool to be able to like sit down and do this for like academic credit and like be able to think about this as an academic kind of project and think about poetry that way. I think is really powerful. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
We're almost out of time in our session, unfortunately. I was just wondering, is there anything else you would like to say about your poems before we conclude the session?
Oh, good question. Let me look. I think just the fact that um I think that and I may have touched on this a little bit, but just the fact that like poetry and crochet and like all of this is all like work, and I feel like that isn't paid attention to it. It's fun, but it can also be something that is like difficult, and that difficulty and complexity can be difficult. It can be hard to kind of face. Um, but but that doesn't mean that like art doesn't have to have any of those things, and that art and work can't be the same thing. And this kind of idea of uh, the labor that people put into stuff like this, I think doesn't get paid attention to enough. And so that's kind of my final thought. And thank you also, just thank you for having me here today. This was so fun.
It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. This has been Dylan Fritz, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.
Bye, everyone.